How many are we looking at of Conservative rebels in Theresa May's party?
Good morning, Belle. That's right. Before Theresa May can do anything more with her deal or go to Brussels to speak with Mr Barnier, she has to lock down the support within her own party. She is fighting off this possible vote of no confidence. And on the latest tally, bear in mind, it's 48 letters needed to trigger that vote of no confidence. It's reckoned that about 42 people have submitted those letters. Now, 25 MPs have done so publicly, tweeting out images of them, and 17 are said to have done so in private if they're all telling the truth. So we're looking at about 6 or so letters needed to go in to trigger that vote of no confidence. And I think Tory MPs on the backbenches will have been watching over the weekend, their successor possibly coming out in the shape of Dominic Raab or Boris Johnson, who's written in the papers today that he once again has a plan for Brexit, but there's not much new in that. So it's whether or not they can see a viable candidate who could take over from May. I think that will be the reason that more letters start to go in today. And the man that's receiving them all is Graham Brady. He's the chairman of the Tory 1922 committee. Here's what he's had to say about it all.
How soon would you reveal had you received those 48 letters?
Well, it's very clear in the rules of the party intended to be an expeditious thing. It's a nonsense when people suggest that anybody would hang around. But as you know, I don't comment on the substance of it.
Who would be the first person you would tell once you received 48?
Would be the Prime Minister.
Well, there'll be all eyes then on whether or not he does get those letters today. But to try to avert this, the Tory Brexiteers in the cabinet, Andrea Leadsom and the other sort of pizza planners, as they're called, will be meeting in a couple of hours to try to talk about what the Prime Minister could get from Brussels beyond this deal to try to stop it falling into chaos.
And whilst they're meeting, Theresa May's also meant to be meeting UK business leaders. What can we expect from that?
That's right, the Prime Minister and Jeremy Corbyn will both be addressing the CBI business conference, and the Prime Minister is going to be talking up what her deal delivers that she thinks Brexiteers want. So, control over borders, control over money and laws, and also being able to bring in talent from around the world. It will be a skills-based approach, bringing in people from the Commonwealth, but Jeremy Corbyn is going to say he would get a better deal in the time allowed from Brussels, that there aren't the protections for environment and workers' rights, and that he wants more of a single market access option and a customs union with the EU. But really there are questions for him now, because he was challenged over the weekend on how he'd vote in any possible second referendum, and he said he didn't know. So I think the Prime Minister will try to take aim at Jeremy Corbyn for that response.
Images of the chaos over the weekend, but it's not over yet. Protesters have said they'll carry on.
Yes, absolutely. On Saturday, between 250 and 300,000 people participated. Yesterday was about 40,000, and there are expectations that the movement will continue today. Actually, early this morning, a number of protesters went to warehouses where gas is being stocked, and they're trying to block those warehouses. So this is going on right now in a couple of sites in France. But probably there will be more protests today. The French Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, last night said he will not give in to the protesters, and that the government will continue with taxing petrol, because this needs to be this money is needed to finance the climate change procedures. So the government will not give in. However, the opposition is already supporting this movement. They sense a moment. The extreme right and the right-wing parties say that this movement was a success. So over the last weekend, this protest started actually as a protest against high petrol prices, but it turned into something bigger, a protest against Emmanuel Macron.
Well, and Emmanuel Macron, meanwhile, was in Berlin. Has he spoken about this?
No, not at all. He has been abroad since last Thursday, actually. It's quite ironic that it's it's perceived as chaos in France right now, at least on the highways. And he was in Berlin yesterday to plead for more collaboration between the European countries, exactly to avoid chaos. He gave a speech in the German Parliament, in the Bundestag, yesterday on Sunday. So let's have a listen.
Et en son sein, Europe, and within it, the Franco-German couple, have the obligation not to let the world slip into chaos and to guide it on the road to peace. We must now have the courage together to open a new chapter. We owe it to Europe itself because we have not, in fact, fully understood the moment we are living in.
So this was the French President Emmanuel Macron trying to take the center stage in Europe, where his country was, the French people were protesting. He'll continue his European road trip today. He will bring an official state visit to the neighbor Belgium for the next 2 days. And probably on Wednesday, he will react to what's going on in his own country. But for the moment, Emmanuel Macron tries to position himself as Europe's only leader.
How have Chancellor Merkel's views shifted on this idea of European integration?
Well, for many years, Angela Merkel's politics was defined by very slow, measured moves and fiscal austerity, especially when it came to European politics. But as Emmanuel Macron outlined in his very impassioned speech yesterday in the Bundestag, Europe is facing some very real and very critical challenges at the moment. And I think this has been a real wake-up call for the German government. Angela Merkel realising that the time to act in order to define the future of Europe and its security is now, and that the answer, as Emmanuel Macron was calling for, is more Europe, greater integration of the European countries in order to make Europe safer, in order to make it more competitive, in order to make it more crisis resistant. In one way which we've seen Emmanuel Macron win over Angela Merkel is the idea of this permanent Eurozone budget, something which really is starting to take shape. The European leaders discussed this yesterday evening. They will continue to discuss the idea of the Eurozone budget with other European leaders that they meet today in Brussels, and this is something we've seen the Germans be won over on, even if it means that the Germans will ultimately be putting their hands in their pockets and spending a bit more. We've also seen Emmanuel Macron win over Angela Merkel on the idea of a European army, something which still remains quite a contentious issue in Germany, where the idea of military spending is quite unpopular, but something which we've heard Angela Merkel continue to defend as something which will ultimately be more efficient to pool the military resources of Europe and also make Europe safer. So we saw the Berlin-Paris axis really looking very strong yesterday and also in recent days, which of course is crucial for Europe, as of course other European countries are looking to Berlin and Paris when it comes to leading the way and defining the future of Europe.